I couldn't possibly summarise that very rich discussion. I just wanted to pick out a couple of things that I think were really very helpful. When Ken talked about us as playing in this new universe and the new role for official statistics, it was a very, very positive approach that he took. Haishan talking about the potential for leapfrogging, particularly in some of the poorer countries of the world, looking for increased efficiency in official statistics. Nuria talking about bright and exciting opportunities, particularly using data as a proxy for human behaviour. Sandy talking about whether we can turn our pipe dreams into reality, and I was very interested in his remarks on the issue of concentration of power. And John giving us a wake-up call and emphasising, I think, particularly skills and capacity that fed across into what a number of the other speakers said. So we've used about half our time. We've got 3/4 of an hour left before we have drinks and informal discussion. And I'm already starting to get some virtual questions coming in, so I can use those at some point, but I'd like to open the floor to discussion. Now, the sort of ground rules for what we're going to do is, I don't mind whether we have questions or comments. If you've got a question, it's really useful if you can say if it's for a particular member of the panel or for the panel in general. And if you could kick off by just telling us who you are and where you're from, that would be very helpful. So, yes, please. I think we've got a microphone coming because we've been urged that we need to speak better into our microphones here as well. So,
hi, my name's Seb. I'm a statistician in the Department of International Development. And my question was kind of looking for an expansion of what John said about creating common cause. But it's more, I guess, directed towards Hayan and Nuria, which is how can organizations such as DFID work together with the World Bank, work together with private sector to kind of push this agenda forwards and get the data that we all need to do these tasks.
Okay, thank you. I'm not going to offer to the panel straight away, so they're all going to keep a note, I hope, of those particular comments that they want to respond to. Hitan.
I'm Hitan Shah from the Royal Statistical Society. There are, I think, within the official stats community, doubts and concerns about big data sometimes. So for that agenda to thrive, as all the panelists have talked about, I think we need really practical examples of where we can move forward. So where do the panelists see the real opportunities given limited resources? Where should we, over the next 2 or 3 years, really concentrate on worked examples which can prove the benefits?
Okay, thank you. I'll take the lady sitting third row back, please.
My name is Sabrina Yuan. I'm with the United Nations Population Fund. And my question is actually in line with what you just mentioned. I wanted to ask for the best way forward for national statistical offices, or to ensure that national statistical offices are not losing their relevance.
Okay, thank you. So we've had 3 from the audience. I'm going to add a couple from the online, and then I'll ask any of the panel who want to respond. So 2 from the online comments. One for John, from Andreas Arevalo, from the National Administrative Department of Statistics in Colombia, Bogota, Colombia. Do you think it's necessary to make changes in legislation in order to use big data as a source for official statistics? And will it be necessary to make changes in governance of the National Office of Statistics? And one I'm going to direct to Haishan, because it's for the World Bank. I think you're speaking on behalf of the whole World Bank here today, Haishan. I hope after a year in the job that's easy. And this is from Nanezi Tonda, from doing an MSc in Social Policy and Development at the London School of Economics. And she, I assume it's she, apologies if not, says, given the lack of database infrastructure, as well as the paucity of data around informal workers, what are the ways forward to tackle these issues, and how can the World Bank's available research infrastructure be part of this, if at all possible? So it's a slightly longer question. I've abbreviated a bit, so I hope that makes sense. So, any responses from the panel? John, did you want to respond to?
Very happy to start. I'll start with Andreas's question from Colombia. In the UK, I think we are lucky that we have relatively new legislation in official statistics. So in terms of the governance, I feel I have no inhibitions in embracing this agenda because my duty is very simple, to produce statistics that serve the public good. And so long as I'm directed to that purpose, then I'm fine. And we have relatively good data collection powers at the moment. There are some that I would like to improve, but I don't think that the first place I would look to is legislation for this. We can probably tweak it to make it better, but a lot of it is about practically getting on with it and accessing the things we can and getting relationships with those people that have got the information and trying to work out how to use it. But the legislative environment in each country is different, so I think we need to look at that case by case. While I've got the floor, I'll pick up the question about the kind of roadmap, how we move forward from here. And I think there's a twin track to it. I think the first one is to experiment. I think this is new territory, so we need to experiment. In the Office for National Statistics, we have a kind of innovation lab, and we have a number of projects. So we're currently looking at mobile phone data, we're looking at smart meter data, we're looking at Twitter data, we're looking at scraped data from supermarkets, and playing with it, see how easy it is to get at it, see what we get out of it, and there's plenty of learning we can get in that. But then the second track is to do some really practical areas. I mean, I mentioned the issue of flow of funds. That is a very big deal for us and the Bank of England when we're trying to understand the economy. So we have started a joint project with the bank about how we can get access to that data and how we can start using it in earnest, relatively quickly, I hope, to improve some holes, or at least some kind of less than perfect analysis that we can currently get out of our national accounting system. So we are driven to use big data by the fact there is a real pressing policy decision-making need for something, and we can concentrate our resources where we see that already in existence. Shall I ask the common cause question while you're there? I mean, I think that is about relationship building. Generally, you think who you can do it. I talked about commercial relationships on the development stage. I think it is really seeing that we have got common cause with the World Bank, with the UN, with the IMF, whoever it is, with different NGOs in different countries. So it's applying the same kind of logic that DFID has always applied in this new data field. And there's some new people coming on the block, particularly in areas like peace and security, who are really interested in kind of data. In Syria, people like kind of the body count people. There's some interesting statistical analyses of fatalities in different places. We must see them as all part of our community. Thank you.
Did you want to pick up?
Thank you very much. Maybe first, a quick response to the question from the online regarding how we can improve data on informal economic activities. And here, first of all, I think so far we have relied on survey to try to look into the informal employment and informal sector. But even there, there's a lot of lacks, and even data collected have not been really fully explored and analyzed. So first of all, a note on what we produce, let's make it open so that there will be more possibility of tapping into what we have collected. Second, whether the approach so far we have been relying on was good enough and allow us to really look into this in a more dynamic way. And I would say that indeed this is an important area considering the size of the informal economy in so many countries. We would need to take it out as a priority and particularly look into what could be some of the new ways of looking at this issue through so-called big data. So I think this is where innovation could come into play. Regarding the question of was to do next to foster some of those experiments. I think, indeed, I think John said many of the national statistical offices and other development partners have started to explore this and actually designing strategies and begin to explore some of the possibilities. And some concrete project and ideas already started to be put into place. But at the same time, I think while we will be supporting that, I do want to thank DFID for always being such a supporter for development data work for such a long time, being the most prominent world leader in this area. So we want to continue to work with you to support that. But at the same time, I think we also need a more dedicated forum to bring the private sector players together with the official statistics systems. And now, today, it's a great forum, a great opportunity, and we managed to have Sandy and some others in. But I have not been seeing enough of such opportunity where really private sector data collectors or data producers and users are actually in this discussion, in this dialogue directly. I think this is where I think we will need to create that forum. And this is also why in the UN Secretary General's data revolution group's recommendations to create a world forum on sustainable development data to bring the different part of the new players into this dialogue so that we'll have a space not only to engage with each other, but also to really innovate together and share our experience together and to devise some solutions, be it from the legislation side to some of the practical solution side. I think it would be very good to have more systematic forum on that.
Thank you. So, Sandy, yeah, do quickly.
There was a question about what real examples, what are sort of the next steps, and just my qualitative observation is that there's data about how people move around during the day. So where they begin the day, where they go for work, where they go in between, that can be done in an aggregate way. So it doesn't refer to any one person, it just refers to, 25% of the neighborhood from here went there. That's been proven in many, many parts of the world to be really important for designing more efficient, greener transportation systems and for designing much better public health systems. So it's pretty reliable data, exists almost everywhere, and it has great utility. Another thing is just differences from norms. So if you see differences in cash flows through credit cards or through businesses, that are sudden differences, those mean that there have been social changes. For instance, with some of the people up here, Nuria and Bruno and people, we're able to show that crime is predicted whenever you get these big social changes. Not every time, but a lot of the time when there's a dislocation in the community, bad things happen. And in any case, those are associated with problems in logistics and mobility and so forth. So that's sort of a nice way to start with sort of existing data sources that we know can be used and sort of gets you practiced. It gets towards new sorts of conclusions about the society, but they're very useful things.
I'm conscious that we want to give, you wanted to contribute.
Yeah, bring one element into it. So I'm going to bundle two questions together. One is how to build common cause, and then the second is some practical examples of where we should focus our efforts. So national statistics offices are doing interesting things, particularly in the Netherlands and Australia, looking at Twitter and consumer confidence, traffic and GDP, that's in the Netherlands, and satellites and vegetation, so farm yields, and that's in Australia. So there is interesting things happening. It's not like it's, although at different paces. Other statistical offices, even in Western, rich Western democracies, aren't doing much, and so that's a problem, but so be it. There is one area, though, that I think definitely cries out for our attention and our focus, and that is call data records and epidemiology. Okay, so during the Ebola crisis, there were maps that were created looking at cell phone patterns, and the media dutifully reported, how you could understand, patterns of mobility during a crisis and where populations are based on call data records. The call data records were about 1.5 years old, okay? It was a complete farce. In fact, it was almost a hoax, except there was well-meaningness behind it. Why was it not up to date of the day? Why was it not released on an hourly basis or a daily basis so epidemiologists could work on it? It's because there's a bottleneck. And it's not one, the way that these bottlenecks work, there's always many bottlenecks altogether. So that's why it's intractable, because it's a hard problem to solve. So where it is that the telecom operator doesn't have the incentive to share it, and there's a lot of negative things that could happen to the telecom operator if it does share this data. It's a cost, it's a hassle, there's no protocol in place to do it, so why do something new? And you've got other priorities, and if consumers don't like it, you're in trouble. Secondly, the privacy regulator is there, or the antitrust regulator is there, and it's going to knock you on the head if you do something wrong. There's a telecom regulator as well, but it perceives that it's not its role to tell the organizations, the telecom operators, what to do. In fact, particularly in places like Africa, the telecom regulator is sort of subservient to the telecom operators. They don't control it. It's the fact of life, because it's the competence of such that the prime minister's brother might be running is one of the commissioners on it, right? It's not the competence that we see in other governments. Third, you have these epidemiologists who actually know how to extract the value from this data. But interestingly, who really knows how to extract sort of these analyses of big data from the call data records? It's not the government's National Health Service. It's small hackers, basically, private sector operators who are usually doing it for consumer analytics for companies, or they're doing it as sort of research analyses because they work at Harvard, right? So, or MIT. I want to be ecumenical. Sandy's on the panel. Okay. So with this policy bottleneck, how do you overcome it? It takes leadership. Where is it? Well, it's hard to find it, but it's going to have to be at the head of state level, right? It's going to have to go up many notches. Now, during the N1H1 virus, George Bush had to make some very difficult calls, and one of the things that was done very quietly is he built out a whole set of quarantine centers for like hundreds of thousands of people in like remote places in the United States, right? It was at the level of the head of state that if there was going to be a national crisis of that sort of level of emergency, that he's going to have to make some fundamental calls. Well, the world has dodged the bullet with Ebola. It looks like the number of new cases has declined, and so I think we can breathe a temporary sigh of relief. But what we can see is that if there was one area where we want to focus our efforts and solve these problems, is to create a structural regulatory rule, a regulatory safe harbor for experimentation with big data, so that you can bring together these entities from the private sector and the public sector and the people with the competence to actually do the analyses with the people who have the data but can't share it because there's these institutional bottlenecks. Together, if we can find that sort of leadership, we can experiment here, and that can be a model for how we can actually adopt new data sources into all the other things that we do elsewhere.
Thank you. So I just wanted to support what Ken is knowing. I know the Ebola story all too well. But in terms of, I guess I would bring the positive side of things. So in terms of private-public partnerships, I would say right now they're happening anecdotally. So there are private-public partnerships. For example, we do have a Telefonica with universities and with the United Nations, and we've collaborated also with the World Bank. But there isn't sort of like instituted universal private-public partnership, or or even at a national scale or around big data for national statistics or for social good. But something that has been mentioned by Ken, particularly by other speakers, but I really want to highlight is that if we really want to tackle important global real problems, the teams have to be multidisciplinary. So there is the data analytics, and there is the people that actually know what's happening in the world, which is not the same as the people that know how to analyze the data, and there is the policymakers. And so it is absolutely fundamental to have teams of people that can understand the problem and the complexity of the problem from all different perspectives. And in the case of public health, for example, having computer scientists together with epidemiologists, together with public policy people, together with decision makers, so we can actually approach the problem from all the perspectives makes sense, because if you just look at the data, especially when you have large amounts of data, you can always find random correlations that have nothing to do with the actual problem. So if you don't understand what the problem is, you might really reach the completely wrong conclusions. And if you make decisions based on that, then you're literally screwed. So I think it's very important to really understand that for these kinds of problems, we really need to work together, and we really need to bring teams of people that are, that have expertise in different fields. And there are examples of doing this. We're doing this. Other companies are doing this, or other groups. But it's all very new, and it's all sort of like seeds, that we are planting in different spaces. And the hope is that, these seeds will grow and pollinate, and there will be more and more examples. Yeah.
Thank you very much. I've got a number of questions that, comments that people want to make. I would say that it's not important only to ask questions. If you want to comment on things that others have said, it's fine. Let's try and get a dialogue going. And in that sense, I've got a couple from William of MyDex, calling from Bath, UK, a couple of points that he makes, and people in the audience, because we've got experts in the audience, might want to pick up on them. One is, he asked the question about how realistic we think policymakers are about the limitations of anonymization. Mindful of the care data fiasco, are there initiatives to share more data across UK public services? And he also asked the question about the work that's been done on what potential there is for the exploitation, the statistical exploitation of data which is held under individual control, as per personal data store models. So some of you may want to pick up on those issues or pick up on other comments that have been made. So please, yes. Can you wait for the microphone, and then you need to speak into it, because we've got a complaint that we can't always be heard well, so please do.
Thank you. Ben Rumlingham, Overseas Development Institute and the Institute of Development Studies. I've got two questions, if I may. The first is really about the scientific basis of big data. A lot has been talked about how big data means we no longer need theory, we no longer need hypothesis, it's a new wave of science. It's hogwash in my opinion, but I'd like to ask the panel, is big data always scientific, and does it need to be? My second question is, having done work on, not big data, but, well, I've done work on big data, but on small data, on how knowledge and evidence gets used by policymakers. Does the panel think there's any evidence that big data is used any more by policymakers and practitioners than small data?
Thank you. Please.
Thank you. My name's Andrew Lamb. I'm actually a consultant to the World Bank on working on an open data project, not big data, open data project in Tanzania. My question is about linear and non-linear systems. I guess one of the things I want to ask is, for the individual professional statistician, professionals all over are really suffering with this sort of explosion of knowledge that's available, and their role is increasingly about trying to curate and guide people in using that knowledge as opposed to being the only ones that can apply it. For the individual statistician that I work with in Tanzania on this World Bank project, they have a really hard time understanding what their professional responsibility is when it comes to, do we use data that comes from, verifiable sources and surveys, or using citizen participation and feedback. So I guess the question is, what is the role of the professional, and are statistics professionals trained in dealing with complexity and non-linear systems to the extent where they could collect useful information in the modern age? The second part of it is, if you get this to work, if you have more statistics and big data supported as well, would that lead to more sort of technocratic decision making very linear technocratic decision making, as opposed to something that's more political decision making, more people orientated decision making? And is there a way that these two, technocratic and political ways of making decisions, could come together? So the role of the professional, I guess, at the individual level, and the role of government.
Okay, thank you. I've got a question towards the back. Can you put your hand up again so that you can see? Thank you.
Hi, so Robert Phillips from DFID. So when I hear that Uber are giving data to Boston, alarm bells start ringing. And I'm concerned about organizations that have a lot of us being reliant on organizations that have different objectives to us. And I understand that one of the responses to that is to be more transparent. But organizations like Google, their entire business model is collecting data. And do we ever expect to have the same kind of control and understanding of the information? And what are the possible ways of remedying this?
Thank you. And I'll take two more, so they're down here, close to one another, and then I'll throw it to the panel. And I'm not asking the panel members to respond to every question, just pick out the ones that you want. Okay.
Thanks very much. My name's Charlie Ogilvie. I'm a statistician currently working in education data, but having been a teacher as well, I've seen it from the other side. I guess I wanted to muse a little on the questions we had from Barth and William earlier about privacy. And to me, there's a real tension here because on the one hand, particularly in the UK, you have a real sense that public opinion is quite against government data. There's a high level of mistrust, not seen well, not helped by things like care data. But on the other hand, we have a public who's more than willing to sell for not a particularly large amount their data to Tesco, to Sainsbury's, to loyalty cards, that actually have an enormous amount of data about them. And to me, it seems to be that the reason they do that is because they get something kind of immediate and kind of useful out of it. They can see the benefits of it. So I guess the question or reflection is how can we kind of apply those kinds of ideas? I think particularly this picks up on things that others have said, but persuade people that actually governments and corporations working together is going to work and not create a potentially technocratic or big brother state. I guess that's a challenge we all face.
Thank you.
Thank you. Alistair Leyland from the University of Glasgow. I'm not convinced that the private sector can work so easily with the public sector, because too often the interests of the private sector are not those of the greater public good. I work in public health. We have a lot of problems with big tobacco, with big alcohol, with e-tobacco, with big food and so on. Why do you think things are going to change? Why do you think it's going to be in these companies' interests to hand over their data?
Thank you. Have I got another burning question before I come to the panel? Vanessa.
Vanessa Lawrence, in my role as co-chair of the United Nations Committee of Experts on Global Geospatial Information Management. Sorry, a bit of a mouthful, I have to say. First of all, can I really thank the panel? What an interesting discussion we're having tonight. And the parallels between the discussion you're having in statistics and the discussions we have in geography are just, you know, unbelievable. Very much the discussions between authoritative data, the role of governments, the role of whether it be the volunteer geographic information sector or commercial companies. But the one thing that we've very much realized in the geographic side, which very much is working with statistics, as many of you know, at the UN level, because measuring and monitoring requires location and geography. What we've seen is that by getting the standards right, by creating the frameworks and putting in voluntary guidance for the private and volunteer sectors, is enabling us all to work better together. And we've particularly seen this when as Hassan so eloquently said, it's about making sure that people do have those frameworks and test beds, as Ken said, in order for people to then be able to enable the future. And one of the things we have seen is excellent case studies coming out of places we wouldn't have necessarily expected, like Rwanda, where they have taken everything that's possible and got away from some of the norms, but absolutely ended up with good authority that their banks will accept and others. And I'd very much like to ask the panel if there are any equivalences that you can think of. Thank you.
Thank you. Right, I'm going to hand it to the panel, but I'm going to ask them to be quite strict with their time, please, and not try and answer all of those points, but pick out the one or two that they want to, because it would be nice if we could get another round of questions in. So Ken, I'll go along the
Sure.
that way.
Yeah, great. First question, should it be scientific or need to be? Easy answer, science, schmience. Next one on privacy, what's the problem? Okay, that is a joke, I apologize. I'll get to the privacy one in a second. Look, all the claims of big data, most of the claims about big data are going to be inflated. It's new. We've seen this before. A lot of the claims about the internet and the web were grandiose and inflated. It was going to end, war, etc., like the telegraph was. And of course, we still have wars. There's no difference there. However, no one would doubt that the telegraph or the web wasn't incredibly transformative in ways that we couldn't see and in ways that indeed we could, and that some of that hype actually did come out. And so I think big data is going to be the same. The question of science, though, and causality, I think, is going to change. I have written a book about it, so it's going to be a more complete answer there. But the short version is that, honestly, I don't know what science means, right? And this very institution was created around the idea that we had to reconceive the notion of what science is, because the original statisticians were playing the cards of correlation when everyone else before it was trying to divine causality following models that were based on Aristotle, right? And so in a world of big data, I think that it's going to be more important that we can do engineering rather than science, which is to say we can answer practical questions to answer what rather than why. I know that is spoiling the hallowed halls of science, and I know it's an unsatisfactory answer. Time is up, but we could talk about that more. And in fact, we're going to be talking about this for the next 20 years. But I think that where it's going to end up is we're going to understand that there's still a role for theory, there's still a role for hypotheses, but if you can collect vastly more data, you don't need to come up with small simplifications. You can have much more, you can learn elaborate things through the data that you wouldn't otherwise have divined at the outset.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Just very quickly, first of all, I do want to acknowledge you and Telefonica, because we have been working, collaborating. The reason I didn't recognize you as from private sector, we have considered you part of us. So let's really continue this great collaboration. Just very quickly, I want to support what Ken said as a priority, maybe in a priority area. Let's look into how we can create a regulatory safe space so that we can move into doing more innovation. And so far, a lot of the effort has been based on bilateral negotiation, but not a collective boundary that being drawn on, so that there's a lot of back and forth and bottlenecks. So if we could target that as one of the priority, would be fantastic. And just another quick response to the issue of indeed professional skill. And even now I'm sitting here thinking how fast this field is evolving and maturing, that how much I don't know, that considering really in the ground and the capacity development and bring us up to state in order to deal with this very challenging and evolving issue would be so tremendously important. So I just want to comment on that. And a lot of other concerns and questions being put forward. I guess, unless we really get our hands wet, we will not know how to deal with them. So that's why experimentation with open mind will be very important.
Thank you.
Hi, so I just quickly pick on a couple of points. So related to your point, I sympathize a lot with the difficulties with dealing with the data, and I think it is well known that there is a huge lack of technical expertise worldwide. on how to make sense of data that is unstructured and that is changing with time and non-stationary, etc. And there's this term of a data scientist, which I think in the US only they estimate there is 200,000 missing data scientists because there is no such a career that you can study in the first place. In terms of you were concerned about maybe we're making decisions too much based on data, so that is conceivable in the future, but just to put things in perspective, Haishan was mentioning that there is 57 countries in the world for which there is absolutely no data. So how do they make decisions in those countries? It's just by intuition, I guess. I mean, by looking, like you were saying, by looking at the sky. So I think there is a lot of what Sandy was mentioning about children dying or children not going to school just because you don't even know they exist because there's no data about them. So I think maybe in the future that might happen, but I think in the process we could help tremendously a lot of countries. And then in the complexity with private-public partnerships, I completely agree with you. It's very difficult. I recommend maybe you can share with some of your private collaborators. There is a short white paper, and I think it's also talked a lot about in the Data Revolution white paper, but there was an earlier paper written by Robert Kirkpatrick at United Nations Global Polls called Data Philanthropy is Good for Business, where he argues why their philanthropy would be good for businesses. In my personal experience, I think it is very important that there is at least one champion in each of these companies that has a certain level of decision-making power or influence in the company that can start some efforts in doing public partnerships and showing how there is no risks for the business, how this can be positive for the business, and sort of like removing some of the barriers and also the fear that a lot of people in the companies have, mainly to the unknown. This is certainly the case with Telefonica. I mean, this is a process that we've been going through for many years on illustrating with examples the positive impact that we can have through these kinds of projects in collaboration with public institutions. But it's not easy.
Thank you. One of my colleagues says that a data scientist is a statistician who lives in the west coast of the United States. Sandy.
Twice as much. Yeah, or twice as much. Yeah. So there's a number of questions asking about, are statisticians trained? What about non-scientific informed decision-making versus a technocratic elite? I mean, no, statisticians are not generally trained in this, and neither are politicians, and neither are citizens, but we're going to have to get up to speed. We've done that in other domains. We are able to make reasonably informed things about economics, reasonably informed discussions about medical things, and we'll get over this one too. It's going to take some work. It's going to take creating standards, as the lady there said, who's doing the geospatial stuff. And that's the way you do it, is you establish standards, people learn about the standards, they see how they work, you develop an intuition for them and so forth. One of the things that wasn't talked about too much, but I think is maybe the most exciting element, is that in doing that, what we're going to do is a lot of really interesting science. I mean, today, the way we run our governments and the way we run our businesses is idiocy. It's based on social science that was done in the late 1800s, right? It's not based on modern science at all. As we begin to get more data like this, we may actually learn how our society works and may actually be able to do a much better job. I think that's an enormously exciting thing. To get there, of course, you're going to have to solve things like the privacy and some of the private interests, which I see are, your companies here must be much more voracious than in the United States. You wouldn't see this level of hostility towards companies in the United States. It's really interesting. But again, the way you do that is you have accountability, you have standards, and you check on people, and you throw them in jail if they don't do it right, right? So we have standards about money. We're going to have standards about data, too. And one of the standards is going to have to be that citizens have more control over data about them, more knowledge about it, more control over it. It's just we live in an era of digital serfdom, and we need to move towards a more digital democracy.
Thank you. John?
Well, I'll start off where Sandy's finished. I mean, our mission as official statisticians is a democratic mission, so we have to start with the citizens. So we should do things that they want and not do things they don't want. And if we mess up, we need to fess up and then move on. But we get things wrong when we tell people what they should think and how they should behave. And if someone's happy to give data to Tesco's but not to me, I have to ask myself the question, so why is this? But it's my job to do something that the citizens want and find a way of making that happen. So we need to make the case, is my answer to that one, from the citizens' perspective. I'd also like to pick up this question of professional duty. And I'd make the analogy with a doctor, another profession. Now, if a doctor tried to treat a patient using the same methods that they used in the 1930s, they would probably be pretty rapidly struck off. Professional duty is about keeping up to date in your professionalism, and we must do the same. So there's not a particular abstract or technical list of things you need to do to be a good professional statistician. It's the skills you need to be a good practitioner and to serve the people you're trying to serve. Are we trained to deal with these types of systems? Well, you tell me, Charlie. We need to get better. We need to get better, and this is the area we need to really focus our training if we're to be true professionals in the future. And we can learn from others, and I'm certainly happy to learn from Vanessa and what the geographers are doing any day. Thank you.
Thank you very much, John. We've got about 4 minutes left, and normally in sessions like this, the panel has the final say, but I don't intend to do it like that. So I intend you to have the final say. And what I'd really like to hear is what you hope will be the result of today's meeting. What would you hope, speaking to any of the panel members, speaking to the Royal Statistical Society, speaking to ODI, speaking to the private sector organisations are here, what would you hope would be a concrete outcome of today's meeting? So I throw it open. Please, we've got a gentleman there.
It's not a gentleman, it's me, Denise. It's Mark Robson, Fellow of the Society. What I would really like, and it's been reflected in many of the excellent comments that we'd heard this evening, is the view, which we could discuss informally, on whether or not the society, or if not some other body, can it promote an intelligent public discussion, a political discussion about appropriate confidentiality. Maybe akin to the debate 50 years ago, I think, on fluoridation of drinking water when I was a small child. Because a lot of ridiculous things are said about confidentiality. If you explain to people, for example, that the migration statistics were not compiled on the basis of passenger manifests in and out of the country or passport data, but via a passenger survey that no one I never know has ever completed, and I travel a lot as do my colleagues, they'd scratch their heads and think that was a bit odd. The government chief scientific advisor, who says some strange things, got himself really into a lather about the idea that any one official would know where he was in London at any particular time on a particular day. Well, you just put a tail on him. It's as old as private detective fiction. You know, there are CCTV cameras everywhere in London. How could he imagine that anyone who was determined to find where he was couldn't do that very, very easily? So some very strange things are said about personal data, what really matters and not. Some things, like marital status, might be very sensitive in some cultures and for some people, but not for others. And I think we're overdue to have an intelligent public debate about this. Who can lead on that?
Great, thank you very much. So that's one proposal. I've got 1, 2, 3 people who want to participate.
Hello, Bill Oates. I work in the Office of National Statistics. What I'd like out of the evening is some advice. I have a teenage daughter who for some reason fancies taking after her father and becoming a civil servant. Should I advise her to study politics or statistics at university?
That was a question rather than... Right, fine. We've got gentlemen at the back and... Yep, thank you.
Sorry, I've pushed in. I think they're the ex-ONS and RSS. I think one thing would be useful to get out of today is how we can really sort of make this initiative global and make sure that nobody's left behind. So when initiatives are being taken forward in terms of, say, with big private companies which are global, whether it's Vodafone, Google, and so on, we talk about issues across all countries and not just each country having their own individual discussions. I think that would be a really good outcome, to really join up across the world and get economies of efficiencies of scale as well. I think that would be one good outcome for me.
Okay. I've got somebody at the back there, and then just behind Vanessa, and then I think Vanessa wanted to speak. So.
Julia Hall from RMS, a company that models disaster risk. I'd like to make a call for more multidisciplinary teams, as Nuria talked about. I definitely encourage more public-private partnerships. With disaster risk, we're seeing that you can definitely draw trends from disaster data which might not be statistically correct. And I think that more multidisciplinary teams would definitely assist with this. Thank you, Nuria.
Okay, thank you. The gentleman just here, and then Vanessa, and then we've got lady across.
Hi, Tom Salmon from Open Knowledge Foundation community. Thank you for the discussion. From what you've talked about, in a sense, it's mostly about data philanthropy and the role of the private sector in this. But as we have supported action on open government data and the work of the Open Government Partnership, in which countries all around the world have tried to open up their government data for the use and reuse by citizens, which hasn't really been discussed here. I think one thing to keep in mind is why the National Offices of Statistics in other countries are not able to do the things that they do. And if creating an alternative through private partner publicships is going to, I mean, maybe it's important to understand why they do what they do, the capacity limits that they have, and also the other thing that to me was a question was that big data here has been talked about alongside the data from our National Statistics Office, but it's really of a very different order of magnitude, velocity, variability, variety, and it also is stored in different formats. It's not stored in object databases, or it's not tabular data at all. It's quite different, and I think there's slight conflation in that sense, in that these two things are not, they're not of the same kind of animal. So that was my thing. I would hope that people continue to question some of the assumptions about this and not overlook the role of government and the interests of government in this.
Thank you. I've got Vanessa and then the lady across. Vanessa and then across. Thank you.
Thank you, Vanessa Lawrence, UNGGL. This is such an important topic. At the moment, we've just seen released the very excellent report, which was referred to earlier, A World That Counts. And what we've also seen is literally hundreds, if not thousands, of senior government and non-government officials and politicians all uniting around the revised goals that will be finalised this year, the SDG goals. The Sustainable Development Goals are not possible unless we get this answered. And I would ask that the power of this panel, the power of this room, would consider some of the very good ideas you've had about a safe space for absolutely experimenting this, but with very significant global backing at the highest level. Because for SDGs to be successful, the answers you've discussed tonight are essential. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you. I'm Zeynep Engin. I'm a member of a group of academics and policymakers who are organizing a conference in next June at Cambridge, and I'm very happy to say that RSS is also a partner for this conference, alongside with departments and centers from Cambridge, Imperial, and LSE. And my proposal is just going to to suggest that we all meet again in June at that conference. And if anyone is interested, I will direct everyone to our website. It's very simple, dataforpolicy.uk. I hope you will be interested. Thanks.
Okay, thank you for the plug. I've got 1, 2, 3, and then I'm going to have to stop it. So I've got Andy.
Thank you. Very interesting discussion. I've certainly learned a lot. So it's Andy Garrett from Quintiles. We called out lots of good examples of big data, and I'm a great believer in it. But I think the one thing I would ask is that we do call out the bad examples as well. I think there's a danger of really quoting the good ones, of being very anecdotal. And good analysis means good analysis across the whole thing. So let's call out the really bad examples and learn from it as well.
Okay, thank you, Andy. Graham, you wanted to speak.
My name is Graham Eel. I'm gradually losing affiliations, but I'm currently a member of the Royal Statistical Society's Working Group on Statistics for International Development. One thing I would like not to take away from this meeting is the feeling that national statistics are less important. In too many low-income countries, statistics are struggling. And they're struggling not because they're inefficient or ineffective, but simply they just don't have the resources. And we have to continue to make the case to invest more in better statistics, regardless of the role of big data.
Thank you. You wanted to speak? Fine. Any burning issue that anybody wants to raise? No? Yes, please.
Can we collect some data and specifically do a poll of the audience on what they think about the topic of tonight, which is a show of hands to say how many people here think, and I'll give you both questions and you can raise your hands if the chair indulges me, who thinks that, thank you, that big data is mostly hype or general statistics with a fancy name, and although statistical agencies can learn from it, I'm a little bit underwhelmed and the challenges are really vast. On the other hand, who thinks that this is a bold new frontier and that we should seize the opportunity to do extraordinary things?
Bias.
Okay, wait, there's always an option C. No, say, add it, please.
Well, I was going to say that because this is being broadcasted, that we can also do a Twitter poll.
Exactly. Twitter poll, use the hashtag. Exactly, use the Twitter poll. And if anyone wants to change the parameters, feel free, you're survey experts as well. If not, with the chair's indulgence, let's have a show of hands. Claims are totally inflated. It's not as great as everyone thinks, and the challenges are vast. Raise your hand. Okay, so a rough estimation, probably about 10%. Okay, you could say undecided. Okay, what 30, 90%. Okay. How many feel like, yeah, this is really new, vibrant, and incredible?
And exciting.
Exciting. So a little bit more, but not much more, and everyone else is undecided. So I'd say about 40% undecideds, 10%, 30%?
Something like that.
Doesn't add up to 100. Yeah, I'm a journalist, right? Ask the Pollinger, he's NSO.
Yeah, we will offer you some lessons in questionnaire design.
I've readily admitted there's biases in big data.
I don't think I can have a better note on which to end this evening's panel. We've got drinks downstairs, so you're all very welcome to join us. I have some thank yous to make, of course, to my 5 panel members who gave me a very easy time. Nobody overran to an incredible degree, like sometimes happens, and all of the contributions were really valuable, so thank you. I'd also like to thank the RSS, the ODI, and the Datapop Alliance for their joint organisation of this evening's panel session. And I also have an announcement to make that I said I'd come back to about your book, Social Physics, because I gather the publishers are downstairs, and if anybody wishes to purchase a copy, they can. I don't know if you're willing to sign it, but certainly. Good. Okay. So thank you all for coming. Eaton, I'm hoping that there will be some follow-up to this meeting and that we will be in touch with you about the ways forward. Great. So thank you all for coming and enjoy the drink downstairs. Thank you.